Good evening, I'm Yochanan El Rom, and this is IBA News coming to you from Jerusalem. We open with a story that's making headlines around the world. Israel feared a public relations fiasco over the so-called Free Gaza flotilla. The reality was tragic and damaging to Israel's already tenuous standing in the international community. At least 15 of the flotilla activists were killed and dozens wounded in a bloody clash with Israeli naval commandos who intercepted and boarded their vessels on the high seas overnight. 7 naval commandos were wounded in the operation. We get more now from IBA's Eli Wogelander.
At least 10 passengers aboard a ship allegedly carrying aid to the Gaza Strip were killed around midnight after they attacked Israeli naval commandos who had stormed the ship. Dozens of passengers and 7 Israeli soldiers, 2 seriously, were wounded in the confrontation. Israel said their forces opened fire after encountering unexpected resistance as they boarded one of the vessels, the Turkish ship Marmara. They were met by activists with baseball bats, sticks, knives, and iron pipes, and then finally from live fire from weapons seized from the Israeli commandos, including one who lay unconscious at their feet. As a result of this life-threatening and violent activity, naval forces first employed riot dispersal means, followed by live fire. Navy Commander Major General Eliezer Marom said that the lives of the soldiers who boarded the ships were in danger, and therefore they had no other option but to defend themselves.
We did not want to confront these kind of passengers. We had no reason to confront this kind of organization. However, I think now we are able to see the just cause of this confrontation. The aim here was not really, as you can see, to bring humanitarian aid to Gaza. This did not need to happen. This did not need to happen. There is no humanitarian crisis in Gaza. The passengers on this flotilla chose in a violent manner, in a violent way. They prepared themselves for this violence against our soldiers.
Turkey said most of the dead are Turkish citizens. Before the flotilla of 3 cargo ships and 3 passenger ships set sail from waters off the island of Cyprus yesterday, carrying 10,000 tons of aid and 700 activists, Israel had urged the flotilla not to try to breach the blockade. Israel offered to transfer the cargo to Gaza from Ashdod following a security inspection, but the so-called peace activists refused. The flotilla was carrying items that Israel bars from reaching Gaza, like cement and other building materials. Defense Minister Ehud Barak expressed regret for the deaths, but blamed the violence on organizers of the flotilla, calling the effort a political provocation by anti-Israeli forces. This is the 9th time that the Free Gaza movement has tried to ship in humanitarian aid to Gaza since August 2008. Israel has allowed ships through 5 times, but has blocked them from entering Gaza waters since Operation Cast Lead. The latest flotilla was the largest to date and the first to end in violence. Eli Wogelander, IBA News.
Dozens of protesters aboard the ship where the clashes erupted were wounded during this morning's raid. 10 of the wounded were flown by helicopter to Haifa's Rambam Hospital for medical treatment. They included 4 foreign citizens who suffered moderate to serious injuries. 3 others were taken to Tel HaShomer's Shiva Hospital. A military spokeswoman told IBA News that other medical facilities treating the wounded included Petah Tikva's Valenson Hospital and Hadassah Ein Kerem in Jerusalem. Meanwhile, a massive outcry erupted following rumors earlier in the day that Sheikh Raed Salah, head of the northern branch of Israel's Islamic movement, who was aboard the flotilla, had been killed during the raid. Police are now saying that Salah was not injured. Meanwhile, at this hour, security forces are evacuating hundreds of other activists after their vessels were towed to the port of Ashdod. Senior foreign ministry sources said protesters who agree to leave Israel willingly will not be arrested and will be flown home. The others will be taken to a detention center outside of Beersheba, where they will have 72 hours to appeal orders to deport them to their countries of origin. Many of the activists have so far refused to identify themselves. Meanwhile, questions are being asked about the way the Israeli Navy planned and carried out the operation to intercept the flotilla. A short time ago, IBA's Eli Wogelander spoke to Jerusalem Post military correspondent Yaakov Katz and asked him if the IDF thinks any mistakes were made in the naval operation.
The Army says no at the moment. In other words, the soldiers that aborted the Marmara, the ship that was organized by the IHH, that radical or so-called radical Islamic Turkish organization. They boarded the ship and they encountered what was later described by the IDF as literally a lynch, a well-planned lynch. activists who were on this ship armed with bats, with metal pipes, with knives. There are pictures of activists even stabbing Israeli soldiers. They did not expect such fierce resistance. They did not expect such fierce violence, that their guns would be ripped off their bodies and then be used to shoot at them. That, though, so in that respect, the IDF's response to open fire, to protect themselves out of self-defense, is understood from the IDF's perspective. What's not understood, and what could be the failure, and these are the questions that the military now is asking itself, is, first of all, how come the IDF did not know about this potential fierce resistance? Where is the intelligence on it? Secondly, were the Navy commandos, which is without a doubt one of Israel's most elite units, were they the right people, the right unit to send into a ship where they would face what's usually, a violent demonstration, which the IDF and border police face off against almost every week, usually in the West Bank and near the Gaza Strip.
Correct, but not in the water. How would they have worked it inside on the sea?
Right. So without a doubt, the Navy commandos, the Shayetet Shloshesrei, the 13th Flotilla of the Navy, is without a doubt the most elite unit that has those sea-based capabilities. But other questions that are now being asked is, were they the right people to deal with crowd dispersion, crowd control, the demonstrations, the violent resistance they faced there? They definitely acted, it appears, according to the way they were supposed to. They did not immediately open fire, only at the point where their lives were really at risk. As the head of the Navy told me, only once one of the Israeli soldiers was lying on the ground with a head wound, unconscious, and the activists on the boat were continuing to attack them wave after wave. Only then did they finally decide that they had no choice but to use live fire to protect themselves.
The Arab world was quick to express its outrage over the outcome of the Israeli raid on the flotilla of ships. PA President Mahmoud Abbas declared 3 days of mourning over what he described as a massacre, while Arab League chief Amr Moussa termed the Israeli action a terrorist act and said that the 22-nation body would meet tomorrow in emergency session to consult on its next step. Hamas rulers in Gaza led a street demonstration and urged world Muslims to rise up in protest. In the West Bank, near the Kalandia checkpoint, Palestinian protesters clashed with IDF forces. Demonstrators threw stones at soldiers. There were no reports of injuries.
We condemn with the strongest possible term the Israeli attack on the flotilla freedom ships that were coming to Gaza in a peaceful manner from Europe, from other countries, Turkey, Arab countries, to deliver some supplies to the besieged people of Gaza. And this Israeli attack, which resulted in the killing of 16 persons and the wounding of tens, we hope that the American administration, President Obama, would continue exerting every possible effort in order to have the Israeli government stop such attacks, such atrocities, such settlement activities, such fait accompli policies, all the actions of this Israeli government that is undermining all efforts being exerted to reach the endgame agreement.
Tensions within the Arab community across the country were high throughout the day. The IDF and police were on high alert in preparation for possible outbreaks of violence and disturbances of Palestinians and Israeli Arabs. The level of security was especially high in the north of the country, near Nazareth, following reports that Sheikh Raed Salah, head of the Islamic movement's northern branch, was among the dead or wounded. A higher Arab monitoring committee, which convened for an emergency session this morning, called for a one-day general strike tomorrow to protest what they call the bloody takeover of the Gaza flotilla. The committee's acting chairman, Ramiz Jiraisi, who is also mayor of Nazareth, called for an international probe into what he described as the state of Israel's crimes. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he gives his full backing to the IDF naval operation. As of this hour, the Prime Minister is going ahead with his planned visit to the White House tomorrow. Earlier in the day, Netanyahu, who is currently in Canada, was said to be reconsidering his meeting with U.S. President Obama in light of the severity of the flotilla incident. A spokesman for Netanyahu said Israel had done everything in its power to avoid a violent confrontation with the flotilla.
Want to see a confrontation. On the contrary, we made repeated offers that they should bring the boats to the port of Ashdod. And from there we guaranteed that all humanitarian cargo would be transferred to the people of Gaza. Unfortunately, this group decided on confrontation. They decided on violence. And when our Navy had to intercept, our young servicemen were attacked with live ammunition. They were shot at with knives and with clubs.
Kadima chairperson Tzipi Livni called Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman and Defense Minister Ehud Barak to offer her help in dealing with the diplomatic crisis Israel was likely to face in the aftermath of the deadly clash between naval commandos and members of the Turkish aid flotilla. Livni's offer was in sharp contrast to attacks on Netanyahu's government for mishandling the flotilla affair made by Kadima Council head Chaim Ramon and Knesset member Nachman Shai.
I deeply regret that these activists seemed more interested in violent confrontation and propaganda than providing humanitarian aid, which was always available to them. The incident would have been ended differently if this was truly a humanitarian mission.
The far-left Meretz Party also harshly criticized the government. Party members called for a thorough examination of the decision-making process regarding the incident and said that even if the government implemented its rights, it shouldn't have acted in such a manner that resulted in as many wounded people. Deputy Foreign Minister Danny Ayalon blasted the attempt by foreign activists to breach Israel's blockade of Gaza. Speaking at a press conference in Jerusalem, Ayalon accused the flotilla protesters of maintaining ties with terrorist organizations and orchestrating an armed ambush of IDF naval personnel.
The armada of hate and violence in support of Hamas terror organization was a premeditated and outrageous provocation. The organizers are well known for their ties to global jihad, Al-Qaeda, and Hamas. They have a history of armed smuggling and deadly terror. On board the ship, we found weapons prepared in advance and used against our forces. The organizers' intent was violent, their method was violent, and the results were unfortunately violent. Israel regrets any loss of life and did everything to avoid this outcome which is the responsibility of the organizers. We repeatedly called upon the organizers to send any humanitarian aid that they may have through us, through the appropriate channels, UN, Red Cross, in the usual way that we are moving humanitarian aid to Gaza. We use also diplomatic channels and others to no avail. Once our troops called them to peacefully follow them, we saw the violence coming out of the organizers in a very, very violent and dangerous way. Their intent was not humanitarian. They refused to send any humanitarian materials or even a letter to our kidnapped soldier, Gilad Shalit. And their real intent was to create a corridor of arms smuggling and terror smuggling to the Hamas terror organizations in Gaza, something that could have really upset the entire situation regionally, destabilize and cost a lot of lives. No sovereign country would tolerate such violence against civilian population, and we call upon all relevant parties to work on calming the situation as soon as possible. Thank you.
In reaction to today's IDF takeover of the Gaza-bound flotilla, Ankara today recalled its ambassador to Israel. Jerusalem, in turn, issued a warning to all Israeli citizens to avoid travel to Turkey. In Istanbul, protesters attempted to storm the Israeli embassy. Farah Kardeli has more in this report.
Turkish reaction to the violent result of the Gaza aid flotilla was swift and furious. In Istanbul, police battled with dozens of angry stone-throwing protesters who attempted to storm the Israeli consulate. The protesters burned Israeli flags and chanted anti-Israel slogans. The Turkish government claims that it was not officially involved with the flotilla. However, earlier today, they withdrew their ambassador and condemned Israel, saying that the action violated international law, and they also vowed that Israel will suffer consequences. The announcement, made by the Turkish Foreign Ministry, stated that by targeting civilians, Israel has once again shown its disregard for human life and peaceful initiatives. We strongly condemn these inhumane practices, they said. Ankara is also demanding an emergency session of the United Nations Security Council to discuss this incident. In Jerusalem, the Foreign Ministry issued a stern travel advisory urging Israelis planning to travel to Turkey to put their plans on hold. Israelis already in Turkey were strongly advised to return home immediately and remain indoors until they do so. Away from the protests, relatives of Turkish citizens who were aboard the flotilla anxiously await news on the status of loved ones who are either dead, wounded, or currently in Israeli custody. Reporting for IBA News, Farah Cardelli.
This evening, the United Nations Security Council will convene for an emergency session on the Israeli operation on the high seas. This as the European Union was quick to condemn Israel's raid on the provocative flotilla. EU Foreign Affairs Chief Catherine Ashton insisted that Israel conduct a full inquiry and immediately open all border crossings into the Hamas-run Gaza Strip. Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman told Ashton that the ship's passengers were terrorists and not freedom fighters. Spain, Sweden, and Greece summoned the Israeli ambassadors to their capitals to demand explanations. French Foreign Minister Bernard Kouchner said he was shocked, adding that nothing can justify such violence. And Germany's Foreign Minister Guido Westerwelle expressed his deep concern about the deaths that occurred.
Today, I am also registering my shock at the report that humanitarian aid was met with violence early this morning, reportedly causing death and injury as the boat convoy approached the Gaza coast.
It is still early to make evaluation if there is casualties or not, but it's an unpleasant situation that we know from the beginning. This ship came to provocate the area and to break the siege to Gaza, which is a military area, and we are not pleased that they will come. If you want to help the Palestinians in Gaza, there is a normal channels through Israel and the Palestinian Authority to bring whatever you like, a humanitarian. It's open for everybody to bring, but not to break the rules of a military area in this area of Gaza.
Catherine Ashton deeply regrets the loss of life as a result of the Israeli military operation against the flotilla sailing to Gaza. Catherine Ashton extends her sympathies to the family and friends of those killed and wounded in this event.
Staying with today's flotilla clash, I'm joined now in the studio by Dan Diker, Senior Policy Analyst with the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. Dan, good evening.
Good evening to you, Hanan.
Do we have a clear picture yet of just who these protesters are?
I think this is one of the overlooked facts of this very unfortunate event, is that one of the sponsoring organizations here is the IAH, the Turkish organization that the CIA, as early as 1996, connected as being one of the major sponsoring organizations to international radical Islamic groups, including terror groups. This is an organization that sponsored Bosnia Muslim terrorists and terrorists in other areas in Europe. And this is something that has been completely overlooked. It's also been overlooked the fact that this group was pictured with children and elderly in Cyprus before they left for the high seas, and that it's very important to underscore that this group was, as well as the other protesters, were in complete violation of international law by breaking a legal blockade that was imposed by the State of Israel because of their sense that there were hostile elements and also illicit materials that were being sent to the Iranian-backed Hamas government in Gaza.
Is there any evidence that from the get-go these protesters planned a violent confrontation with IDF forces?
Well, I don't think we really know that. I think, in fact, some of the reporting that's been done here on IBA today has really shown that there are many questions that the IDF has got to ask itself in terms of operational issues, in terms of intelligence issues. Perhaps Israel wasn't quite aware that there was going to be so much violence against its soldiers as actually happened. We talked about axes and other weapons being used against soldiers. But let's also bear in mind, in terms of the blockade itself, this is a blockade just like the United States blockaded Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis, or that NATO blockaded Yugoslavia during the Bosnia War there, or that the British blockaded the Falkland Islands in 1982. So blockades by democratic free countries against hostile elements that mean to do harm against vital security interests of those countries is a very common thing, and Israel is really just joining the other community of free democratic countries that have imposed blockades, including the United States blockade of the Persian Gulf in the 1991 Gulf War.
Did the naval forces have no other alternative than to board the ships, or was there some other way to stop this flotilla?
Well, you know, we're all Monday morning quarterbacks after the fact, Yochanan, but clearly if Israel had not boarded this flotilla, as it had warned to do every day for a number of days, and the international community knew that, and the flotilla organizers knew that, there would be an issue of a cat-and-mouse game, and Israel would be made to look absolutely ridiculous, where these ships would sort of be skirting around Israeli military assets and ships that are trying to guard legally these international waters against these violent demonstrators that are in fact protecting the Hamas tyranny against the Palestinian people. One thing that's very interesting, by the way, just about the IAH, the International Relief Fund, is the fact that they're a pro-Hamas organization. They're an anti-PA organization. So the international community, including Catherine Ashton of the United Nations, is actually now protecting people that are supporting the Iranian-backed Hamas and in defiance of the Palestinian Authority. How's that for an irony?
Dan Diker, policy analyst with the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. Thanks much, Dan, for coming in this
Thank you, Yochanan.
In other news today, Aryeh Luva Eliav, a leading member of the founding generation of Israel, died last night at the age of 89. For several decades, Eliav was a senior member and leading ideologue of the labor movement. President Shimon Peres cited Eliav's contribution to the development of the Negev, including the settlements of Hevel Lachish and Nitziana, and the establishment of the city of Arad. Peres described Eliav's life as a glorious trail marking the paths of the State of Israel. He always searched for the most challenging, difficult, and pioneering places and was an exemplary model for generations in the State of Israel. Labor Party leader and Defense Minister Ehud Barak described Eliav as a fighter, an educator, a pioneer, and a receiver of Aliyah. Eliav served in the Knesset from 1965 to 1979 and from 1988 to 92. He withdrew from the Labor Party following differences over settlement policy in the territories. In pre-state days, he worked in the Jewish Agency. He joined the Haganah and volunteered for the British Army during World War II. He spent his IDF service in the Navy and was discharged as a lieutenant colonel. He was awarded the Israel Prize in 1988 for his unique contribution to the State of Israel. In local money matters, drivers take note. The price of gasoline is going down. You heard right, going down at midnight tonight by 5.08%. 95 octane in the self-service pump will cost 6.35 shekels per liter. That's the lowest price since the beginning of the year. Stock Talk now. Share prices on the Tel Aviv Exchange retreated today. Let's look at the late afternoon numbers. A break in our heat wave as Sharav conditions continue to envelop the region. Here are the highs and lows. That's all for today. I'm Yochanan Elrom. Thanks for watching. Have a great evening and shalom from Jerusalem.